The hallways of the most powerful building in the world were empty. Security lights cast long shadows across the marble floors. Outside, the nation slept. But inside, footsteps echoed through the silence. A Secret Service agent stationed at the East Corridor checkpoint heard them first. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the residence level, descending the stairs. President William Jefferson Clinton was walking the halls again. This wasn't the first night, and it wouldn't be the last. For 7 months, from January to August 1998, the president had developed a ritual. Every night around 2 o'clock a.m., he would leave the residence, descend to the main floor, and walk, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. He never spoke to anyone, never acknowledged the agents who watched him pass. He just walked through the cross hall, past the East Room, along the colonnade, through empty corridors where Lincoln once walked, where Kennedy once paced, where Nixon once brooded. And then, as silently as he'd appeared, he'd return upstairs. The Secret Service agents were instructed to maintain distance. Don't engage unless necessary. Don't ask questions. Don't discuss it. But they noticed everything. The president's face, the way he moved, the fact that sometimes he'd stop in front of windows, staring out at nothing, the fact that sometimes his shoulders would shake, like he was crying, the fact that he never, ever looked at peace. In 2015, 17 years later, one of those agents finally spoke. His name was David Morton. He was 61 years old, retired, and living in Virginia. A journalist tracked him down for an oral history project about the Clinton presidency, and Morton said something that had been classified, buried, and forbidden for nearly 2 decades. President Clinton was falling apart. We all saw it. Every night at 2 o'clock a.m., he'd walk those halls like a ghost, and we were ordered to pretend we didn't see anything. The story of Bill Clinton's midnight walks reveals the hidden crisis of his presidency. Not the public scandal, not the impeachment hearings, but the private collapse of a man who had everything and was losing it all, one sleepless night at a time. This is the story nobody told while it was happening. The story of how the most powerful leader in the world became the loneliest man in America. January 17th, 1998. Bill Clinton sat in the map room of the White House, facing a video camera. Lawyers surrounded him. He was being deposed in the Paula Jones sexual harassment lawsuit. Under oath, he was asked about Monica Lewinsky, a former White House intern. "I have never had sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky," Clinton said. It was a lie, and within days, the whole world would know it. On January 21st, 1998, the Washington Post broke the story. The president had engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a 22-year-old intern. There were tapes. There was evidence. There was testimony from Lewinsky's friend, Linda Tripp, who had recorded their conversations. The scandal exploded instantly. Media coverage was relentless. Congressional Republicans called for impeachment. The word Lewinsky became synonymous with presidential disgrace. But for Bill Clinton, the real crisis wasn't political. It was personal. Clinton had been married to Hillary Rodham Clinton for 23 years. They had one daughter, Chelsea, who was a freshman at Stanford University. The Clinton marriage had survived many storms, allegations during the 1992 campaign, Whitewater investigations, constant Republican attacks. But this was different. This wasn't a political enemy making accusations. This was the truth, captured on audio recordings, documented in phone records, proven beyond denial. Hillary found out the truth on January 21st, the same day the public did. Clinton had lied to her for months. When she'd asked about Lewinsky, he'd denied everything, and she'd believed him. Now, sitting in the White House residence, Clinton had to tell his wife the truth. What happened in that conversation has never been fully disclosed, but those who were in the building that day described hearing shouting, things breaking, a door slamming. Hillary didn't leave the White House, but according to staff members, she moved into a separate bedroom. She stopped attending private dinners with her husband. When they appeared together, Publicly, the coldness between them was obvious. Chelsea was even more devastated. When Clinton called her at Stanford to confess, she reportedly hung up on him. For weeks, she refused his calls. When she finally did speak to him, according to friends, she told him, "You broke our family. You broke Mom, and I don't know if I can forgive you." For Clinton, a man who had built his entire identity around being loved, being rejected by his wife and daughter, was catastrophic. And that's when the midnight walks began. David Morton was 44 years old in 1998. He'd been with the Secret Service for 12 years, assigned to the Presidential Protective Division for 4. He'd served under Bush, then Clinton. He was trained to be invisible, professional, and silent. But what he witnessed during those 7 months haunted him for 17 years. In the 2015 interview, Morton described what nobody else would. "The first time I saw President Clinton walking the halls at night was January 23rd, 1998. It was 2:15 a.m. I was stationed at the East Wing corridor. I heard footsteps and turned. The president was walking toward me. He was wearing a white t-shirt and dark sweatpants. No shoes, just socks. His face? I'll never forget his face. He looked 10 years older than he'd looked that morning. His eyes were red. He hadn't shaved. He walked right past me without making eye contact, just kept walking. I radioed the command post. "POTUS is mobile. Residents to main floor." They responded, "Copy. Maintain distance. Do not engage." So I watched him. He walked to the East Room, stood in the doorway for maybe 5 minutes, just looking at the empty space. Then he continued to the state dining room. Same thing. He'd stand, look around, then move on. This went on for about 40 minutes. Then he went back upstairs. Morton continued. The next night, same thing. 2 o'clock a.m. Then the night after, and after. It became a pattern. Every single night, the president would walk the halls between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock a.m. Other agents started noticing too. We'd talk about it quietly. "Did you see him last night?" "Yeah, he walked for an hour. He looked terrible." But we were explicitly told not to discuss it outside the detail. This was classified. If the media found out the president was wandering the White House at 2 a.m., like he was having a breakdown, it would be another scandal. Another former agent, Patricia Reynolds, also spoke in 2018. She'd been assigned to the overnight residential shift. "I was stationed outside the residence elevator. Multiple nights, I'd see President Clinton come down around 2 o'clock a.m. Sometimes he'd acknowledge me with a nod. Most times, he wouldn't. One night in March, he came down and just sat on the stairs. Didn't walk anywhere. Just sat there for maybe 20 minutes, head in his hands. I didn't know what to do. Finally, he stood up, looked at me and said, 'Sorry, Patricia. Bad night.' Then he went back upstairs. That's the only time he ever spoke to me during those walks." A third agent, whose name remains confidential, gave testimony to presidential historians in 2016. "The worst night I remember was in August, right after his televised address where he admitted the relationship. That night, he came downstairs around 1:30 a.m., earlier than usual. He walked to the Oval Office. I followed at a distance, standard protocol. He went inside. The light turned on. I could see his silhouette through the window. He sat at the Resolute desk, and then I heard it. He was talking, loudly. At first I thought maybe he was on the phone, but no, he was alone. He was talking to himself, or maybe to someone who wasn't there. I heard him say, 'I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, I didn't want.'" Then silence. Then, "How do I fix this? Tell me how to fix this." I realized he was talking to someone he imagined was there. Maybe Hillary, maybe Chelsea, maybe God. I don't know. After about 15 minutes, he turned off the light and went back upstairs. The next morning, he appeared for his daily briefing, like nothing had happened. Composed, presidential. But I knew what I'd heard. The agents all described the same pattern. Clinton walked every night. He never ate during these walks. He never read or worked. He just walked, and sometimes stopped, and sometimes stood at windows, and sometimes sat in empty rooms. and he always returned upstairs alone, looking exactly as broken as when he'd left. While Clinton walked the midnight halls, the outside world was tearing him apart. Independent counsel Kenneth Starr had been investigating Clinton for years. Whitewater, Travelgate, Filegate, but Lewinsky gave Starr what he'd been searching for: evidence of perjury and obstruction of justice. In September 1998, Starr delivered his report to Congress. It was 445 pages and contained explicit sexual details about Clinton's encounters with Lewinsky. Congress released it to the public. News organizations published the graphic content. It was humiliating beyond measure, not just for Clinton, but for Hillary and Chelsea. The most intimate details of the president's private behavior were now public record, read by millions, discussed on television, turned into jokes on late-night talk shows. On December 19th, 1998, the House of Representatives voted to impeach Bill Clinton on charges of perjury and obstruction of justice. He became only the second president in American history to be impeached. The Senate trial began in January 1999. For 5 weeks, Clinton's fate hung in balance. If convicted, he would be removed from office in disgrace. But publicly, Clinton maintained composure. He gave speeches. He conducted foreign policy. He smiled at events. He played the role of president. Privately, according to those closest to him, he was collapsing. Clinton's personal secretary, Betty Curry, later told investigators that during this period, the president would sometimes call her office at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock a.m. He'd just silently talk, she said, about everything and nothing, about when he was governor, about Chelsea when she was little, about how he'd ruined everything. Sometimes he'd cry, sometimes he'd just go silent for long periods, and I'd wonder if he was still there. His chief of staff, John Podesta, recalled, "There were days he couldn't focus. We'd be in a meeting, and you could tell his mind was somewhere else. He'd zone out. You'd have to repeat things." This was the President of the United States, and he was barely functioning. His longtime advisor, Dick Morris, spoke to Clinton frequently during this period. In his 2004 memoir, Morris wrote, "Bill told me, 'Dick, I wake up every morning, and for about 5 seconds, I forget. I forget what I did. I forget what's happening, and then it all comes rushing back. And I think, how do I face another day like this?'" I'd never heard him sound so defeated. This was a man who'd survived everything: poverty, a broken family, political defeats, scandals. But this broke him, because this time he couldn't blame anyone but himself. Hillary remained frozen. She appeared beside Clinton at public events, but their interactions were mechanical. According to White House staff, they barely spoke to each other privately. Hillary's close friend, Diane Blair, kept notes of their conversations during this period. After Blair's death in 2000, these notes were sealed in an archive. When they were finally released in 2014, they revealed Hillary's private thoughts. January 1998. H says she feels like she's living in a nightmare. Can't believe B lied to her. Can't believe he did this. Doesn't know if she can stay. March 1998. H says she's staying for Chelsea, and because leaving would give Republicans what they want. But the marriage is over emotionally. August 1998. H says she looks at B and sees a stranger. Doesn't know who he is anymore. Wonders if she ever did. And Chelsea, far away at Stanford, was struggling. Her roommate, who requested anonymity, gave an interview in 2018. Chelsea cried herself to sleep most nights that year. She felt betrayed by her father. She felt humiliated for her mother. She felt like her whole family was being destroyed in public, and there was nothing she could do. She stopped answering her father's calls for a while. She told me once, "I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at him the same way." February 12th, 1999. The Senate voted on whether to convict President Clinton and remove him from office. On the perjury charge, 55, not guilty, 45 guilty, not convicted. On the obstruction charge, 50, not guilty, 50, guilty, not convicted. Bill Clinton had survived. He would remain president. That night, Clinton gave a brief statement in the Rose Garden. He thanked his supporters. He said he was profoundly sorry for what he had done. He pledged to spend the remainder of his term working for the American people. He looked calm, composed, presidential. But David Morton was on duty that night, and he watched what happened after the cameras turned off. After the Rose Garden statement, the president went back inside. I was stationed in the main corridor. He walked past me, and I could see his face up close. He wasn't calm anymore. His jaw was clenched. His hands were shaking. He went straight to the Oval Office, closed the door. About an hour later, I heard something, a sound. I couldn't identify it at first. Then I realized he was screaming, not words, just a raw, guttural scream. Then silence. Then I heard something break, glass shattering. I radioed the command post. Possible disturbance in Oval Office. They responded. Stand down. Do not enter unless POTUS requests assistance. So I stood outside the door, waited. About 10 minutes later, the door opened. Clinton came out. His tie was loosened. His eyes were wet. He looked at me and said, I'm sorry you had to hear that, Agent Morton. I said, No problem, sir. He nodded. Sometimes you just need to scream, you know? Sometimes you just need to break something. Then he walked upstairs. I entered the Oval Office to assess. A glass ashtray had been thrown against the wall. That was all. Nothing serious. But the emotional breakdown I had just witnessed, that was serious. Patricia Reynolds recalled a similar moment in March 1999. The president had just returned from a trip. It was late, maybe 11 p.m. I was doing a routine sweep of the West Wing. As I passed the Oval Office, I heard crying. Deep, sobbing, crying. I stopped. The door was slightly open. I looked in. President Clinton was sitting on the floor, his back against the resolute desk, his head in his hands, crying. I didn't know what to do. Should I go in? Should I call someone? Before I could decide, he looked up and saw me. His face was red, tears streaming down. I'm okay, Agent Reynolds, he said, just having a moment. I nodded. Yes, sir. Let me know if you need anything. Thank you, he said. But nobody can give me what I need. I need my daughter to not hate me. I need my wife to look at me without disgust. I need to not have destroyed the best things in my life. And nobody can give me that back. I didn't know what to say, so I just quietly closed the door and walked away. But that moment stayed with me. The most powerful man in the world, sitting on the floor, crying because he'd lost his family's trust. The 2 o'clock a.m. walks continued through the summer of 1999. But something changed. The walks became longer. Sometimes Clinton wouldn't return upstairs until 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock a.m., just before dawn. And according to staff members, he started talking to the portraits. White House curator William Allman was working late one night in June 1999. He was cataloging items in the China room when he heard someone in the adjacent hallway. It was 3 o'clock a.m. He stepped into the hallway and saw President Clinton standing in front of the portrait of Abraham Lincoln. Allman later recounted, he was just standing there, staring at Lincoln's portrait, and then he started talking to it. You held the country together, he said to the painting. You kept the Union from breaking. You saved democracy. And what did I do? I couldn't even keep my own family together. He paused. Did you ever feel like a fraud, Mr. President? Did you ever feel like you didn't deserve to be here? I realized I was witnessing something very private. I quietly retreated before he noticed me. Another staff member, whose identity remains protected, witnessed Clinton in the East Room talking to Thomas Jefferson's portrait. He said, You were a genius. You wrote the Declaration. You believed in ideals. And me? I'll be remembered for lying about sex with an intern. That's my legacy. Not peace, not prosperity. Just scandal. It was heartbreaking to witness. By late 1999, Clinton's mental state had stabilized somewhat. The impeachment was over. He was still president. His approval ratings, oddly, remained high. The public separated his personal failings from his job performance, but his relationship with Hillary remained frozen. They lived as roommates, not spouses. Chelsea gradually reopened communication with her father, but the closeness they'd once shared was gone. Clinton's midnight walks became less frequent. By 2000, they'd mostly stopped, but the damage was done. In his 2004 autobiography, My Life, Clinton wrote about this period with unusual candor. Those months were the darkest of my life. I had betrayed the people I loved most. I had embarrassed my country. I had proven every cynic right who said politicians couldn't be trusted. I spent many nights walking the halls of the White House, unable to sleep, unable to forgive myself, wondering how I'd become so reckless. There's a unique loneliness to being president during a crisis you caused yourself. You can't blame anyone else. You can't ask for sympathy. You just have to stand there and take it, knowing you deserve every bit of it. But what Clinton didn't write about were those 2 o'clock a.m. walks in detail, what he actually thought during those hours, what he said to himself, to the portraits, to the ghosts of presidents past. David Morton, in his 2015 interview, reflected on what he'd witnessed. I think President Clinton was trying to walk away from himself. Like if he kept moving, kept walking through those halls, maybe he could leave his mistakes behind in one of those empty rooms. But you can't walk away from yourself. And every night, when he finally went back upstairs, he had to take all of it with him. The guilt, the shame, the broken relationships. We were ordered not to talk about those walks. Not then, not for years after. The official line was that the president occasionally had insomnia and would take walks to clear his head. Normal behavior, but it wasn't normal. It was a man falling apart in the most powerful building in the world, and we all had to pretend we didn't see it. Bill Clinton left office on January 20th, 2001. His presidency ended with high approval ratings, around 66%, one of the highest of any departing president. The economy was strong. The country was at peace. By conventional measures, he'd been successful, but the personal cost was immeasurable. Hillary and Bill's marriage survived, though it remained complicated. They maintained separate lives while presenting a united front publicly. When Hillary ran for president in 2008 and 2016, Bill campaigned for her, but those who watched them closely noted the distance between them. Chelsea eventually reconciled with her father, but according to friends, she never fully forgave him. She named her children Charlotte, Aiden, and Jasper, none carrying William or Bill, a notable absence. In 2004, Clinton underwent quadruple bypass surgery. His doctors said years of stress had damaged his heart. Whether the stress of 1998-1999 contributed, nobody could say definitively. But Clinton himself told friends, "Those years took years off my life." In later interviews, Clinton has occasionally referenced that period. In a 2018 interview, when asked about his biggest regret, he said, "The Lewinsky matter, not just because of the political consequences, but because of what it did to my family." Hillary had to endure public humiliation. Chelsea had to hear the whole world talk about her father's infidelity. I put them through hell, and I can never undo that. The Secret Service agents who witnessed the midnight walks are still bound by confidentiality protocols. Most have never spoken publicly. Those who have, like David Morton, did so decades later, when they felt the historical record needed the full truth. Morton concluded his 2015 interview with this reflection. People remember Clinton's impeachment. They remember the scandal, the trial, the politics, but they don't know what happened inside the White House at night. They don't know about the president walking empty halls at 2 o'clock a.m., like he was looking for something he'd lost. They don't know about him crying in the Oval Office. They don't know about him talking to portraits of Lincoln and Jefferson like they could offer him absolution. The public saw the political drama. We saw the human collapse. And that's the real story of 1998. Not the impeachment, not the trial, but a man who had everything and destroyed it, and then had to live with that knowledge every sleepless night. The halls of the White House have been walked by many troubled presidents. Lincoln during the Civil War, Nixon during Watergate, Johnson during Vietnam, Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But Clinton's walks were different. Those presidents faced national crises, external threats, forces beyond their control. Clinton faced only himself, and that, perhaps, was the loneliest walk of all. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking the video and sharing your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, subscribing to the channel is all it takes.